All right, hello, and welcome again to the Shir for the Conservative Yeshiva on the Haggadah and the Seder. This is again an introductory Shir, one where we're going to talk a little bit of preliminary work related to one of the preliminary Shirim I put up on the website about the Mishnah and the Tosefta. So I'm not going to go through the entire Mishnah and the Tosefta. You can find a commentary on the Mishnah in the Mishnah Yomit archives, which should be on the website. Plus, you can find the Tosefta on the website here for the Haggadah and Seder course as well. But just a brief word about why I think it's worthwhile for you to look through the Mishnah and the Tosefta before you even begin studying the texts that we're going to be dealing with more extensively in the course. The Mishnah and the Tosefta are both Tanaitic texts. That means texts that were composed. They were not written, but rather they were composed between, let's say, the destruction of the temple 70 CE and the completion of the Mishnah in about 220 CE, and the Tosefta right around the same time. The primary text, the text that became the basis for both Talmudim, was of course the Mishnah, but in the Tosefta, at least in my opinion and the opinion of many modern scholars, contains both the raw material that existed before the Mishnah was edited, as well as some later additions to the Mishnah. Now, quite naturally, this subject, this chapter, has been the focus of several subjects, several studies. The most important three, I would say, are Baruch Boxer's book called The Origins of the Seder, which was published, I believe, in 1984, where he goes through the Mishnah and relates to the Tosefta as well as other rabbinic texts as well. And more recently, Shama Friedman's book in Hebrew called Tosefta Atikta, and Judith Hauptman from the Jewish Theological Seminary also has an article about the Mishnah and the Tosefta. She has actually several articles about the Mishnah and the Tosefta, specifically a couple dedicated dafka to this chapter. So a lot of my work is based on their work. I've developed it a little bit. You can find some of my stuff in my book, the Shechter Haggadah, which I've spoken about before. But I just wanted to briefly go over what I see as the relationship between the Mishnah and the Tosefta. If you look in the Mishnah has what I would call a Seder. Again, what is a Seder? A Seder is an ordered meal. It's a meal that's structured around, specifically in the Mishnah, around the 4 cups of wine. If you look through the Mishnah, Mishnah Bet, the second Mishnah says, Mazgulo Kos Rishon. They mix for him the first cup. The fourth Mishnah says, Mazgulo Kos Sheni. They mix for him the second cup. The Mishnah 7, Mazgulo Kos Shlishi. They pour for him a third cup. And Revi'i, they pour for him a fourth cup, is also in the Mishnah. So much like our modern meal today, it's organized around the 4 cups. Every action in the meal, the Kiddush, the discussion, Birkat HaMazon, the conclusion of the Hallel, are all accompanied by one of the cups of the wine. It is a very highly structured meal. The Tosefta, interestingly enough, only mentions the 4 cups in a completely different context. It talks about providing a poor person with enough wine to drink for the meal, and that would be 4 cups. And it seems to be, Shama Friedman has written about this, and I've written about it elsewhere, that the editors of the Mishnah said, look, what are these 4 cups for in the Tosefta? Why does the Tosefta say that somebody has to be provided, everybody has to be provided with at least 4 cups? It must be because there are ritual uses to these 4 cups throughout the meal. And that goes along with the general distinction between the Mishnah and the Tosefta. The Tosefta has some order to it, but it seems to be just the same order as we might find in any banquet. In other words, there's appetizers, there's an opening cup of wine, there's appetizers that precede the meal, there's the meal, it's followed by some discussion, but the ordered meal, the Seder that we find in the Mishnah, is really largely absent in the Tosefta, and that's why a lot of scholars, including myself, consider the Tosefta to be an earlier form of the Mishnah. And you can kind of see when you compare the 2 texts, and I hope you'll do this by looking at them, that there are a lot of elements in the Mishnah that are just absent in the Tosefta, namely all of the rich sources of the Magid, beginning with the Arami Oved Avi Mishnah, the Paris passage in the Torah and the Midrash, the the three questions, or the four questions, as we're going to see. Rabban Gamliel's statement. The Tosefta has very, very little discussion about what one is supposed to say during the meal. The only saying that we find at all is really the Hallel. So really the Hallel seems to be the center, the focal point of the Tosefta's, again, in my opinion, earlier version of the ritual for the Pesach evening. And the Seder, as we know, it really comes to take place in the Mishnah, where we really get a fully ordered meal. So I want you to read over the Tosefta, notice what we can glean from the Tosefta about this earlier form of the meal, and then read over the Mishnah. That will be a good preview for our studies. We're going to be focused on individual issues throughout this course. And again, as always, I encourage you to enter into the forum, ask some questions, respond to what I have to say, read over the Mishnah Tosefta, say, Josh, I didn't understand such and such a text. Can you please explain it to me? And we'll do the best we can.